asking for? What support do they want from the public sector to meet those commitments, to scale up what they're planning to do in their businesses? So having said that, I'm going to go straight away to Jaime. Working here on a very, very innovative model with their Colombian dairy farmers. So I want Jaime to give us a brief description of what their business model is, but importantly, what their commitments are, what they are struggling with, how they're constrained in how they want to scale. So just one thing to say to all our panelists, we are really concerned about time because of the number of people. So Jaime, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Let me tell you a little bit about Alquería and Colombia. Well, Colombia is a country that has nearly 1.1 million square kilometers, 50 million people, and Alquería is a dairy farm industry that was founded by a doctor that has a small farm, and he decided to pasteurize the milk because the milk was sold to some people that was selling the raw material. And he said, well, I have to change this. I have to do something different. And he decided do that. Alquería has now 60 years, is the first producer of white milk in Colombia, is the pioneer on UST milk, and the producer of heavy cream, and the most preferred brand in Colombia. What I have to say about the things we are doing there. In Colombia, we have a different model that the formal market is 50%, and we have 50% informal market. What that means? It means that most of the people is selling the milk without being industrialized milk. What we are doing to change that? We expect to reduce the areas needed for cattle. That means that in Colombia, the production is nearly 1.5 liters per cow. This is really small. And what we are doing is some different things and to increase productivity. Now we have some farms that have 4 liters per cow. That means a lot. It's increasing 3 times the actual production. Also, the cows are fed with grass, yes, as you mean. In that way, if we continue with this process, that means that we can reduce by half the CO2 production. That's really good. Also, the UST products do not need cold chain. That means we can reduce energy production. That is really good. Also, in Colombia, the production is made in pouches. And what we are doing is reduce the caliber of the pouches. In that way, we consume less plastic. That's what we are doing, Chris.
Yeah, I just want to, having said that, I'm really also understand that you have a lot of land issues here, in terms of how you run your businesses and how you link with farmers. What asks do you actually have to the public sector? We're here to really hear what we hear your business is growing, but what do you really need to keep stimulating that business growth?
Well, what we have is we're piloting a lot of things. What we need is to scale the things by financing, giving support more support from the IFC and from the public sector is what we need.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We'll come back to a couple of those comments as we go forward.
Thank you.
So Paula, you're working there with the navigation company, expanding hugely, but we're really, really interested here, of course, and it was mentioned by Laura Tuck as well, about this great work you're doing in Mozambique with Portucel. So please give us your commitments. I'd like to hear what you're doing.
Okay.
And, of course, how it's impacting on the landscape. And what are you trying to look for while you're here today? Thank you.
Okay. So I'll start by presenting the company very... Oops. Okay. Thank you. To present the company very quickly. We are a Navigator Group is an integrated business. We go from forests to pulp and paper products as well as energy. And we include research and development, we include forest management, pulp and paper production and distribution. So, and we have in our mission that we are a global company with a reputation for innovation and also for sustainability in the way we use the natural resources, in the way we use our forest materials to have our products, but also to improve somehow people's lives. And that's what we've been trying to do. Being a European leader in the uncoated wood-free paper and also in bleached eucalyptus pulp, we are quite important nationally, also because we contribute to our GDP with 1% and with 3% of the Portuguese exports of goods. But we started looking at other geographies some years ago, and in 2009 we went to Mozambique, where we have Portucel Mozambique, that, as you were saying, was mentioned by Laura Tuck. In Portucel Mozambique, we've started a project. It's mainly a forestry venture with the possibility for industrial investment also. We are in the first phase in the forestry part of the project. And our idea was to take to Mozambique what we already do in Portugal, because we manage a vast area in Portugal. We have implemented a responsible forest management project in Portugal. We are FSC and PFC certified, and certification is quite important for us as an external recognition of good practices being put in place. So that is our idea for the Mozambique project. We were granted a vast area in Mozambique in 2 provinces, in Manica and Zambezia. They total 356,000 hectares. And it has been going step by step, because Mozambique is a very particular country. It's a poor country with poor, not to say unexisting, infrastructure for development projects. And we've been doing things by starting with an environmental and social impact assessments that we did for the whole area. We've been engaging with people since the government, local authorities, but also with people, because this, the area that we have in Mozambique is not a concession area in a typical way. It's an area where we were given the right to access and to use, but there's people inside. And the project was, since the beginning, a project with no resettlement. So we have to talk with these people to really have access to land and do our job. So that's what we've been doing, and it goes slowly, because we are implementing a mosaic-like project in Mozambique. It's been inclusive, because we want to have people on our side, on their places, using the same land. And land use is something to be shared by the company and also the people. So we've been building our team building capacity, not only in the team, but also in the local communities that are around us and that give us access to their land, because there are customary rights involved. So we have a very important community development program that has been going on since 2015, and that has involved many, some hundreds of households and people. They have been also, that's a way that benefit sharing is put in practice with the project. And we have been doing our plantations on a commercial scale only since the last years, because we took many years in the beginning building all this framework at the environmental and social level, and also by finding out the best way to interface with the local communities and the households.
Just one little point there. Are you integrating smallholders? Are you supporting smallholders, or are they working for the company? Is there any direct relationship there?
Yeah, they work for the company. It's the people who gives us the land. So the local people who have those customary rights, they give us the land, and they receive work in our project, and also some extra benefits. They also are trained, of course, to do things appropriately, because we implement environmental procedures for conservation. We are identifying high conservation value areas. We are promoting health and safety practices, training people in all sorts of areas. And we also try to involve smallholders and outgrowers in outgrow schemes. This is only beginning now, but it's something in which we also need help, because we need to bring other counterparties to a project that is pioneering a new market, but in a country with subsistence economy. So it's good to have other inputs to the project.
Well, I think there'll be some questions coming up there also in terms of land tenure, land management styles as well. So
yeah, land tenure. It's quite, I would say, if not the most important, one of the most important issues. Land tenure is quite informal. There is no register of anything, and you have a very informal way of getting access to the land. So we're working on that also, and that's very important for the investment security risks that you have to face.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back to those questions on those points. So handing over now to Chris Brown, who leads the environmental work at Olam International. I'm really fascinated on the point that Olam has been running around the world, and I know your CEO is very well known amongst a lot of the community here as well, really advocating for a carbon tax. And a big supporter of the Natural Capital Protocol, which, of course, Laura Tuck made a reference to as well about the challenge of that. So I'd really like to hear from you, Chris. How is that going? Is there going to be a carbon tax? So, and if so, how are you going to bring that in? How transparent would that be? How would that be on the books? Those are the kind of things we'd like to hear. Thanks.
Okay, so simple questions.
Yeah, very simple and very straightforward.
Good morning. Yeah, still morning. I'm Chris Brown from Olam. So those of you that don't know Olam, we work with farmers. So we work with about 4.7 million smallholder farmers, or we're connected to 4.7 million smallholder farmers. We work directly with just under 400,000 in our sustainability programs. We also work with large-scale farmers, so onion growers in California, cotton growers in Australia. We have our own farms and plantations, so we manage about 2.5 million hectares of land. So things like coffee, rice, almonds, these are things that we grow and manage. And we have about 200 processing plants. So we're very much a vertically integrated business. But we're also a very young business. We're a bit younger than Apple, we're a bit older than Google. So we see ourselves as a bit of a disruptor in a sector that's occupied by many companies who are over a century old. So one of the things that our CEO has tasked us with is to really challenge the future, our future, the future for agriculture. So we recently looked at the business model, and he's decided that we're now going to move forward with something called OLAM 2.0. And as part of that, he wants us to reimagine global agriculture. So that means looking at what we're doing, looking at the sector, looking at the role of agriculture in the world today and in the future. So the role of agriculture in landscapes particularly. Now to do that, we've got to focus on what does the landscape look like? What are the safe spaces that we can operate in? So we need to understand things like the planetary boundaries. We need to understand what climate change means to us. We need to understand what climate change means to agriculture. How can we continue to operate going forward in a world that is facing, as we've heard today, 1.5, 2, 4 degree rises? We're not sure, but how do we look at those scenarios and put those into our business models moving forward so that we can be here for today and the long term going forward? Reimagining global agriculture now has been evolved into, I guess, three key pillars within our business. So 3 pillars that we hope will deliver a triple positive impact. So prosperous farmers and farming systems. So how can we build economically viable farming systems and farmers within those systems? How do we build the thriving communities in which those farms operate? So again, there's no point being a thriving, an economically viable farmer if the community around you is failing, because at some point that support system that you rely on will be gone. And then how do we regenerate the living world? So how do we maintain, restore the world that we're operating in, to maintain the ability to work in that safe space? So that's where OLAM's at the moment. We've recently launched something called a living landscape policy that quite neatly wraps everything up. And bizarrely, because we're just around the corner from 2020, sets 29 time-bound commitments that we need to achieve to deliver that policy, that living landscape policy, that policy that allows us to work with people, both in the public and private sector, to deliver that future. So again, putting ourselves under no pressure there. Our ask, I guess, and the constraints that we're facing, you've mentioned carbon. We'd love to see a global carbon price. We'd love to see a role of agriculture in that space as well, to really drive innovation and differentiate the companies that are actually moving forward and innovating already on this. And it's that innovation that will hopefully pull other people along with us. Land tenure, we're not going to forget that. That is a huge issue, and really look into the public sector to support on that and provide the guidance and steer and governance around how that can work in the future. Again, to allow us to have those living landscapes with agriculture, forestry, other industry, communities, all as part of that landscape. I've got a huge list here, actually. I only started off with about 3 things I wanted to talk about today, but after listening,
yes, steady on.
It's a huge list. So I'm just going to pick out a couple, and you just lean in on the natural capital protocol. So that was a piece of work that OLAM's participated in, and Mark Goff would be proud. I've got the little pin badge on here that I often forget speaking at his events for the Natural Capital Coalition. But that's now evolving. We've got to incorporate social capital. We've got to incorporate human capital. We've got to understand that all of these things need to coexist, and we need to innovate in all of those spaces. One of the things that we're doing and other companies are doing, and other organisations, not least World Bank through its WAVES program, is looking at how do you account and value for natural capital and incorporate that into your business models. So the last person that I recruited into my team is a chartered accountant, because I don't need another sustainability person in the team. I need somebody who has a finance background, who can understand finance within OLAM and start to understand how do we really understand the business value of the stocks, the soil, the water, the forests, the communities, the people that we're working with, and be able to measure the flows. So what are the changes that are being incurred through our business, and what are the changes that we're contributing through the positive actions? So that's probably one of the biggest areas. So I'd love to see waves and valuation of those capitals really move forward into the mainstream, into finance, into insurance, that allows people to look at companies in the private sector and say, yeah, we can distinguish between this company and another company based on how it's dealing with those drivers of long-term value.
Yeah, I mean, those are very big statements. I mean, I think that's really fascinating. It also comes into the fact that in our first panel this morning, I mean, when we're looking at capital markets and assets, agriculture, you know, is a very, very difficult sector for people to invest in. It's very disjointed. You've got agricultural production, agricultural processing, agricultural inputs, logistics, and so on, all the way through to distribution and marketing. It's very, very disjointed. So I think that's really interesting comments you put down there. So we'll give you some feedback on that in a few moments. So over to you, Bas. I think Rabobank's a fascinating model, and I had the privilege of spending time with your CEO last week, and he was making a lot of pledges at the Innovate for Climate session that we did last week in Frankfurt, and he was on one of the panels which was about sustainable ag, and he got very much involved in a lively cocoa debate as well. But in terms of sustainable agriculture, he's making a lot of commitments, particularly with UNEP. So it'd be great if you could explain more about that, how that's going, and is it going to scale?
Thanks a lot, and thanks to be invited to participate in this panel, because I think it's a truly fascinating topic. I'm trained as a tropical ecologist, so I try to balance work with my passion, and that really works here. A short note on Rabobank. A cooperative bank, 125 years old. At the maximum consisted of 1,500 very, very small cooperatives set up by poor farmers who couldn't get finance from the banker in the city. So they really built their own future. And of course, they tackled the issues of then, of those days, 120 years ago. And we try in that spirit, as that cooperative element in our DNA, to fight the problems of our clients and our members today at a global scale. Just to let you know, almost half of our business is Dutch, but the rest of the business is global in F&A. So we focus on food and agriculture to a very large degree and invest well over 100 billion euro in this case in F&A worldwide, both in the biggest food companies, 18 out of the 20 biggest food companies bank with us, but we also finance well over 80 million hectares of land, especially in South America, North America, Australia, New Zealand, and in the Netherlands. So very strong on the primary production side, and always in that role serving society as a cooperative bank serving the community. That's on the balance sheet. We also invest in large minority stakes in approximately 15 banks in Africa, rural banks supporting the rural community, also in Latin America and Asia, but also we offer support to professionalize a little over 200 farmer cooperatives in developing countries to get access to market. Now, that's who we are, and now we come to the challenges of today. Last year, we actually went out with a new strategy called Growing a Better World Together, because we felt that even though we were trying hard and servicing our clients, things are definitely moving in the wrong direction. We had a few examples of people making that statement here on stage as well. And with the growing population and with natural capital diminishing, we are actually in an urgent need of change. And we think we have a responsibility because we are well positioned. We finance large farmers. We have large numbers of people who depend on our financing, and they are in the fields that matter most to planet Earth, so to speak. So we said, let us start a program and be public about it, where we want to focus on improving the food system. We called it Kickstart Food. We look at Earth, as described, but also at waste, because waste can definitely be an important part of the solution. Look at healthy diet, so nutrition, and stability of markets, because once we start getting closer to the wall, the stability of the markets, before hitting it, will go down. And we found a partner in the work that we do, actually jointly with Olam, in the Climate Smart Agriculture Program of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We found a partner in UN Environment to actually set up a public-private partnership to invest $1 billion over the next 5 to 7 years in making agriculture more sustainable. Both stopping deforestation among the clients who are part of the program, but also enhancing reforestation, integrated crop livestock and forestry systems instead of large-scale monoculture, and investing in degraded land instead of deforestation. So those pillars are in a fund, and that fund will actually be used to leverage and to get private money in. So we commit to approximately 700 million euro in that program, looking for grants to a degree of, say, 50 million and soft money for 250 million to be combined into that system. And we were talking about scale, and I think there was a very right remark from Jennifer from Calvert saying, this is still too small. So what we discussed internally is say, well, we're going to do this, we want to make this work, and either it will be 5 to 10 billion quickly, or we fail. So even though it sounds like big numbers, it will actually become very big quickly, or it will not work. And what we want to do is to work with companies like this, because of course we're an enabler as a financial institution, but we also want to make, and that was mentioned this morning as well, we want to make the connection to regular money, so to speak, and that's why we structured the fund and make it possible to have senior notes for people who don't want a lot of risk and short tenors. We've got junior notes to have public money coming in that will actually be an evergreen fund, no return, but the money will come back. And there's a mezzanine piece that is actually completely fit for multilaterals and people who want to invest at a longer tenor, a higher risk and a lower return, but still some return in it.
Yeah, my question there is that when it's back to the agricultural systems or potential investments, what's the minimum amount the fund would support? What's your guidance on that? Because that's what I'm always worried about. I feel that the SME sector really misses out on so much. You know, I mean, you can channel resources through banks and so on, but what's the minimum amount you're looking for?
All our clients have access to it, and that means depending on the countries in which they operate, because of course the public money will set regional boundaries, and there we have large clients. So those will be large clients. The average client in Brazil has 10,000 hectares of land, which, by the way, makes it possible to have a landscape approach serving one client, which is very efficient and reaches scale. But we will also work with the banks who serve the SMEs. So Banco Sicredi in Brazil is a bank in which we have a 25% stake. They will actually set up a program for SMEs to service them as part of a loan that is then provided through them to smaller farmers.
Yeah, I remember it was always very disappointing 2 or 3 years ago when a lot of companies, particularly the agricultural companies, were looking at raising money through the green bond market. Yeah. And really looking at their business models and coming forward and saying, you know, we're going to invest in this plantation and we're developing this landscape and it's going to cost us about 45 million, 50 million, and then the green bond companies or the banks would be turning around and saying, well, sorry, we look at 250 million minimum. So I think this is a huge challenge.
The first project we're looking into, which is a little smaller than we hope on average, is below 1 million. So we can also do small.
Good.
But we need to kickstart it. But it needs scale. If we don't get scale quickly, problems will become bigger and bigger, and we're at the wrong end of the rope.
Okay, well, thanks very much. So let's hear from the World Bank Group side. So here we got Jürgen, our senior director on the agricultural practice. So you've heard quite a few words there, Jürgen, and I know that you're very passionate on this subject about bringing finance in. What have you got to say to respond?
Great, thank you. I made 6 points that I picked up from your asks, and I will respond to each one of them briefly. But before I do so, I'm happy to be back here. Good morning, everybody, at the Global Landscapes Forum. Just like Michael Jenkins, if you allow me one slight deviation, this morning's main panel, I was really excited to listen to that panel. Just like Michael Jenkins, I've been in the business for about 30 years. And until 5 years ago, none of us believed that we would ever be in a space where we would have private capital like Jennifer and the players like that sitting here basically not telling us, sorry, but you know, we can't really figure out a business model how to get major capital into the landscape, but rather saying the opposite. She was saying it's possible. It's not easy. She called it boring. I don't call that boring. But she said it's possible. And that news to me is extremely exciting because we are getting closer and closer to a business model, an operational model that links global public good desires that we all have with the investment firepower of those out there in the various shapes and forms as they come. And really will be, if we unlock this, the future is incredibly exciting. You know, I was involved in one of the largest soil and water conservation programs and landscape restoration programs in China 30 years ago on the Loess Plateau. This was a $500 million public investment at the time. Plus what private investment. It wasn't big companies at the time, but a lot of farmers put a lot of money and effort and sweat into this. So this was close to $1 billion. It transformed over a 15-year period an area the size of France. I have seen with my own eyes that it's absolutely entirely possible to actually transform a completely degraded landscape in a very poor environment with no basic capacity to do anything and no money coming in from anywhere. And that brings me to your first ask, which was sort of the most prominent, which is the land tenure system. If people don't have the right to the land, that they manage their own landscape, it's not going to change. And this is true for a large company like Olam that has, or others that have major assets at risk, but it's equally true for the smallholder farmer. If the smallholder farmer doesn't know whether he or she has that piece of land, in 5 years from now, she will never plant a tree. She won't. Why would she? She will use it as good as you can, but there will be no investment in that landscape. And investment in the landscape is key to restoration. It's key to sustainable landscape management. So land tenure is absolutely critical, and there is no ideology about it as far as the World Bank is concerned. It is not only about private ownership of land. Land use rights are equally important. If you have a 5 to 10 year lease, that is something you can go with. You can begin to invest if you have that right with you. And there's different forms and shapes, and we need to be very flexible and locally adapted in how to do this. But the bottom line is, if the individual or the household or the company don't know whether they will still have right to that land 10 years down the line, nothing will happen. Basic, simple, and absolute key. Right. Second one is, how do you manage the livestock around it? This didn't come up, but it's a very big one. I don't want to dwell on it. There are many environments, integrated landscapes on this planet today. Sub-Saharan Africa is a very big one, but the pressure on the overall biomass of the landscapes through indiscriminate livestock management and grazing is so strong that no matter what you do, you're going to degrade your asset class of land. So that's a very big one as well. The quest for a carbon price, you know that the World Bank is very strongly in favor for getting a global carbon price. If we don't create this incentive, many things will not happen. So you have an ally with us. It's a really tough one, but it's going to have to happen. We actually believe it will happen. It's not a question if, it's a question when. And if organizations or events like this can help us move forward, you can rest assured wherever we go, we talk about this. In the capitals of this world. And we see this as an absolutely essential step forward. Valuing natural capital, you mentioned the WAVES program. It is totally clear that right now what the world does is borderline criminal with its natural assets. Wherever you go, this is everywhere. It's in some countries stronger than in others, but it's everywhere, including in Europe in some parts. So this is absolutely essential that we begin to understand what is it that we are actually squandering. If we don't have a value on it, how do we protect it? And we're now learning more and more how extremely high the value is of natural landscapes. If we have that, we can then build a program around how we can protect them and how we can invest them in a more meaningful way. I want to talk about policies a little bit. There's always the quest for big money. We talked about small money and big money. And public money generally is perceived to be small money compared to the gazillions out there. Not quite. When you look at it globally, do you know, any of you in the room, what the global public subsidies, public taxpayer money, subsidies are into the agricultural sector in aggregate globally? Anybody have the number? It is $500 billion per year. Not billion, trillion. It's $585 billion per year that goes into the agriculture sector for a variety of purposes. And unfortunately, only a small percentage of that money is actually used for environmental and social improvements. In Europe, it's a fraction of about 25%. In other countries, it's even less. So changing those policies to achieve partly these objectives that we are discussing here, creating better land tenure systems, having better R&D on the ground, having the public infrastructure on the ground, supporting climate-smart agricultural practices with this money rather than not caring about it, getting better nutritional outcomes, targeting it more to the smaller rather than the larger growers. These are 5 or 6 simple things with a huge amount of money. It's $500 billion a year that can change the outcomes dramatically for our purpose, which is to have more sustainably managed landscapes. So, and we as an institution are very involved and very engaged to do exactly that. And then the final policy is, of course, the broader environment, the business environment in these countries. You want private investment from smallholders, from family farms, from SMEs, but also from large companies. And you want to create an environment, the policy environment, where that's feasible and where you can attract this in a meaningful way. So a lot of work to do, but I think all of what you said very resonates with us on the public side. I don't know, Vikram from the IFC.
Yeah. So yeah, I was going to hand over to Vikram now and say that, I think when you look at financial instruments and the innovations you've been looking through at Vikram, I'd be really grateful if you could give us this, talk about this Kenya forest bond model. I think that's really interesting. And, sure. And see if it can be scaled up, because it's all about scale. Thank you.
Great. So, but if you'll indulge me, I'll give
Everyone
you a couple
wants
of
to be
quick
indulged
examples.
today, don't they?
Everybody wants to be indulged.
Yeah,
so firstly, welcome to IFC. I noticed that, thanks, we are hosting this here, so we are thrilled to have you all. Plus, the private sector side is all IFC investees or partners. So I just wanted to note that and thank them for contributing as they do. But before I get into my comments, I do want to address this boring issue, if I can.
Please,
everybody wants to take a crack at it. And here's my interpretation of boring. I think this is extremely exciting, all the work everybody's doing. But if you want to unlock big money, it needs to become boring. And by that, I mean it has to be de-risked in a way that big asset managers working on behalf of institutional investors see this as an asset class, as in when we get there, that is investable, that is got a good risk-reward balance, and is therefore boring, like a bond, which is one of the reasons why, and we'll come back to why we chose the bond route for the forests bond. But before we go there, I just wanted to sort of check through a few of the instruments that IFC is already deploying, but at the end of the day, I'll close out with some remarks on the forest bond. Investments. Clearly, we're investing in Olam, in Portucel, in Alkeria, and these are all companies, many others in Latin America and Africa, in wood products, in agri-commodities, in protein, milk. All of them have smallholder issues. A lot of them have land issues, and many of them have forestry-related issues. So that's where our ESG screening, our performance standards are critical, and our specialists supporting the certification schemes that were talked about are all part of effective sort of IFC engagement. The other part of IFC's offer is on advisory, where we work, well, it's a fancier term for technical assistance, either through grants that we help leverage for particular projects or money we have. And across these two, I just want to give you a couple examples to sort of set the stage in terms of how IFC is operating across landscapes, if you will, integrated landscapes in an interesting manner. One is coffee farmers in Ethiopia. We partnered, and I want, since these three companies have already highlighted their examples, Nespresso. We worked with the Nespresso Sustainability Fund, and we provided $3 million to them to enhance the environmental sustainability, or rather, effectively for Nespresso to provide funding for small-scale farmers to plant shade trees for their coffee. And the World Bank's Carbon Fund kicked in with a $3 million grant in order to enhance the environmental sustainability and do some training around that. So I think that was another sort of quasi-public, because we don't think of ourselves as private or public, but I have asked, by the way, for the real public, which is government. Maybe we'll come back to that. So that was sort of one example of the coffee, shade-grown coffee in Ethiopia. Another example, which is somewhat different, but I think based on the comments from Calvert this morning, I think is important, is IFC organized, including its own investment, a $55 million loan for the cooperative, for tea cooperative in Kenya called KTDA. And this was to do 7 run-of-river hydro plants, which of course are owned by the cooperative. And why was that important? That was important because the tea farms are in rural areas, and so energy access was an issue. But also along with it went advisory services to help in terms of landscape management, if you will, replanting trees in Kenya lowlands, because a lot of that land had been depleted to fire the boilers in the tea factories. But now that you have energy available, you can start to sort of address the degradation of the land. So I think those are the kind of examples where we don't necessarily think of directly links to energy. I was glad she made the link this morning, but there is an interconnectivity between them. Final point on climate risk before I come to forest bonds. Climate risk was mentioned. We are also developing tools, especially in the forestry and pulp and paper industry, where we are looking at data in terms of impact of what climate is going to do what could happen in 2030 and 2050, and what it could do to species shifts and how plantations, and we haven't extended it to agro-commodities yet, but at this point, you could be looking at a type of eucalyptus species, and you could be planning ahead to see how you might want to both terms of plan for rotation with different species, or how you might want to consider shifting, because climate change is going to change the landscape. Sorry for the pun on that one. So I'm going to switch to what you really wanted to hear about. So the forest bond. So the forest bond, I've seen after several years of work, about 15 months ago, we launched the inaugural forest bond. It was an innovative capital markets instrument. And the idea was, with avoided deforestation, there's no revenue stream, and it accounts for nearly 20% of greenhouse gas emissions globally. There's a need for, again, we're talking big numbers, $75 to $300 billion just to halve deforestation rates. And yes, the world is working towards a big unified national level programs, but we thought, as we wait for that, how do we start to create the capital markets infrastructure in order to help support this sector? So that's when we sort of came up with the idea, and ultimately over 2 years of work in partnership with both BHP and Conservation International, issued a $152 million bond. And it's a green coupon bond, not necessarily a green bond. And the reason it's a green coupon bond is because the investors have the choice of taking their interest either in cash or in forestry carbon credits. And the forestry carbon credits come from a 200,000 hectare conservancy in Kenya called Kasigao. And the critical part of this is it's not just about taking the money and investing it to sustain forests, but it's also about taking that and taking it to provide alternative livelihoods. Our colleagues at the bank tell us that 90% of the 1.2 billion people in poverty rely on forest resources. So if you're going to take away the forest resource from them, you have to provide alternative livelihood. So this particular project issued $152 million, which was bought by the like of CalSTRS, Nuveen, TIACREF, big name investors, who then have committed ultimately to, over the course of the 5-year period of the bond, annually decide whether they want credits or not. Now, the point is, whether they take credits or not, BHP, which was the partner, will backstop them and always make sure that the credits are monetized so that the project is guaranteed 5 years worth of revenue in terms of preserving the forests. But the interesting thing here was, and thanks to, it won a couple of awards, it was recognized, but the most interesting part of it is the replication potential. I think we heard about net deforestation commitments. I would love to explore, if we have time, how we can help corporates sort of green their supply chain, meet this net deforestation commitment, say in the palm oil sector or in the cocoa or coffee sectors in particular, where there is a lot of traction around this stuff. And I think we tried that 5 years ago, it didn't work. It may be time to revisit some sort of a variant on that. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Vikram. It's very comprehensive. It's good to see all the innovation and instruments that you're coming up with, lots of different ideas. So I'm going to go to Nabil of MIGA. Nabil, you're the main agency for de-risking all of this. Is that right? And if so, can you please tell us how we can collaborate?
Thank you, Chris, and thank you everybody for the opportunity to be here. Yes, indeed, we are. I mean, we are a de-risking institution. However, we are a bit particular in the type of risk that we do de-risks. I represent MIGA, which is the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, and without going on a limb, I believe we are the least known institution within the World Bank Group. We are very much a niche, if you'd like, a type of institution. However, modesty apart, we feel that our role is quite important in how we can assist private sector investments to move forward in the emerging markets, and especially fragile states and the most impoverished of countries, the IDA countries. Just to give you briefly how MIGA go about its role is basically our role is to assist private sector investors to manage some of the risks that they may identify when they have decided to proceed with an economic opportunity in a country. They may face certain issues like they are not too sure about an investment climate in that country. They are concerned, for example, about land tenure, about the land rights. The country may have passed new laws for land ownerships, and the investors may be a bit concerned about the sustainability of these new laws, and if a new government may come in and decide to change this. So MIGA's role is to basically encourage investors to move forward with their investments by covering these risks. So we do provide what we call an expropriation risk cover, where should you proceed, an investor proceed with the investments and face an expropriation or confiscatory risk in that country, MIGA could step in and help out either through resolving that dispute with the government and have them basically to stop taking any adverse action that may impact that investments, or you know, if we fail in that role, then MIGA definitely will step in and compensate the investors for the loss that they may have suffered through that expropriation of the land or of their assets. The other risk that some investors may be concerned about could be also they're going into foreign markets. They are probably investing in foreign currency. You have returns that need to be sent back to the investors, lenders that have provided these loans would like to be paid back, and the investors may be facing the risk of transferability and inconvertibility of the currency. They're earning most of most of their revenue in local currency, and they will be concerned about the inconvertibility risks. What if the economic situation in the country has dropped to a point where they can no longer convert this money, or the central bank, are rationing the foreign exchange? So MIGA could step in also and cover that type of risk by compensating this inconvertibility risk, if you like, and giving the foreign exchange to the investors outside of the country, and we will take from them the local currency to dispose of it internally in the country. Or they may be have the foreign currency earning, but they are not allowed to transfer it. And MIGA again can support that by assisting in the transfer. And if we fail into that, also we will compensate by paying the investors outside of the country. Another risk that the investors may be concerned about, especially if they go into fragile conflict state, we talked earlier Burundi, we talked Central African Republic. There are certain countries that are coming out of conflict, and investors are willing to go forward, and they would like to proceed. They're again identifying economic opportunities, but are concerned about the war civil disturbance risks. What if they got targeted as foreign investors? What if they got targeted because they were in the wrong the wrong region in the country? And MIGA, again, we can cover these type of risks and compensate investors for the damages that they may suffer from war and civil disturbance risks. Also, what MIGA covers is a temporary business interruption. That means because of that war civil disturbance risk, they could no longer operate the business for a period of time, and they have fixed costs that they need to keep on paying, and for like their employees and the land, the machines if they have an agro-processing plant. And MIGA could compensate this loss of fixed costs that they are undertaking. And in certain cases, we can even look at the lost revenue that they could have generated during that period in time. And last but not least, also an important element, I think it is relevant. We have covered it in one agricultural project actually in the past, where the government enters into an agreement with the investors. The case in point that I had is basically, it was in an agricultural project where the government did put some limitations sometimes on the export. And the investors have managed to secure from the government concession to allow them to continue exporting throughout the period, even if they put restrictions on that, on the agricultural product. And the investors were concerned about what we call a breach of contract. What if the government decides to renege on their contractual obligation to allow the export of the products? And MIGA basically can cover that breach of contractual obligation, that should the government renege or changes that contractual obligation, MIGA could step in and again try to help in resolving that problem between the government and the investors to an amicable resolution. And should we fail into that, then MIGA definitely can step in and compensate the loss.
Yeah, just one little point there. Do you see the agribusiness space or agricultural investment as increasing in the eyes of MIGA? Because to date, MIGA has been a bit limited in agriculture, the opportunity. But do you see that growing? I
do see that growing, especially in the agro-processing and the value chain area. It is we have a lower amount of on the farms side and more on the agro-processing side and the manufacturing. So the value added
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I just wanted to sort of explain, as we got partners here, our private sector partners, we must never underestimate how much they've invested in their supply chain. And what that really means is the outreach they have to smallholders and communities. Because, I'm looking at some of these questions coming up. I think we've covered some of them, and I'm hoping to welcome some more questions from the audience and online. But I was going to ask Jaime to sort of explain, that linkage, just how do you link to these smallholders? How do you work with NGOs, or is it all through your own business operation? Do you partner with the government? How does that work? How do you build that supply chain?
We do it all together. We have a specific project that we call Milk for Peace. That's important for us because we signed it with the guerrillas 2 years ago. In that way, we have to move into the landscape and see what we are going to do. In this pilot, what we do is we involucrate 150 farmers in this program, and what we did for them was to support them buying the milk. That's the important thing, supporting them, that they know that we are going to buy the milk every day, that they don't have to take the milk, going back home and make cheeses for them, and try to go to the countryside and sell the cheeses. Also, Alquería commit to transportate and to provide coolers in order to storage the milk for 2 or 3 days and make it profitable. Otherwise, it's impossible to move. What we want to do now is to replicate the business model, is what we want to do, and involucrate more things on it, like inputs, selling inputs to them, because they are far away. Also, train them in how to do it, the best way to do it, and also give credits, because they need it. As you said, it's important that they know that they have the land, that they have the titles of the land. It's important for them. Otherwise, it's impossible to give them credits. What we want is that 12 million farmers that live in poverty in the countryside, of Colombia countryside, what we dream is to integrate them.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jaime. So I just want to ask you one thing there, though. But are you doing this alone, or are you collaborating with NGOs or civil society?
We do it all together with the government, with private companies, and also the IFC is supporting us.
Okay, no, that's great. But to you, Paula, as well. I mean, as you're building your systems and you're planning to incorporate smallholders, are you building partnership with NGOs on the ground, or are you working with government, or is this purely a company initiative?
A bit of everything, actually. Okay. Besides our partnership with IFC and some work also done with some NGOs, we're working also with specialists. Well, we're talking about, in all this event, we're talking about doing things at a landscape level. And when you do things at the landscape level and you expect to restore, to have a positive impact, you must zoom out and look beyond what would be the natural boundaries of what your project is. And when you zoom out, you have to be wise in what concerns the way you're using the resources, the way you're using what is there in that landscape. So you have to deal with these land tenure issues. You have to deal with evaluation of a perception from the people who have the customary rights about those resources, because you have practices that are in place by those people that own the land that not always are healthy for these natural resources. So you have to somehow interact with them and bring them into your project as almost like partners also. So that's what you have to do. You have to at one hand, use cutting-edge technology like GIS to make maps, because you cannot run a project like this without having things mapped also through participatory methods with the communities, with the households, with the families, because they're the ones who have the customary rights. And we're doing this. We're doing this with help from Terra Firma and ORAM. They're working with us in these participatory methodologies, talking to people, helping us somehow counter the lack of information that we have on land tenure. And while doing this, we're also working with them, besides giving some benefits, direct benefits, small stuff that people need, we're also helping them in this community development program, so that they become more skillful in using the land for their agriculture. So we are providing seeds, we have demonstration fields, we have been training them into conservation agriculture. So this is how we are involving the smallholders, the outgrowers, and bringing our project as at a level that it exceeds the national requirements, the legal requirements, and actually can work as a landscape-based project, including, because landscape is also about people, so we need people to be involved and, like us, to value what the land can give them. And sometimes they have a very short-term perception of what the resources are. They are to be used, and then sometimes the practices that they put in place are not the best. So it's also about a little bit about changing this perception, and together with people.
Okay, thank you. Let me look at this question we have here on the screen. Is incorporating externalities a possible way for agribusiness to become more sustainable? I mean, I'm fascinated by this subject because I think very often, sustainability has been such a broad word. What does it really mean? And I think, I'm sort of all that kind of way where we look at companies making voluntary commitments, but regulation has to be there. If we want change, and I mean, Chris from OLAM has been saying this, as well, of course, on the World Bank side, regulation has to come in about externalities. So let's put this to the panel then. Is incorporating externalities a possible way for agribusiness to become more sustainable? I'm not sure who wants to take that. Not Chris first, because he was the advocate. I'll let Vikram come in first.
Look, we talk about externalities as a carbon price. Let me take the example of cocoa, which we were starting to talk about earlier, or any of these commodities. If companies are willing to do, if there is a commitment to net deforestation, any of these sustainable commodities is going to cost more if you're going to address the externality, whether it's through a carbon price or a carbon market or any sort of other sort of related pricing mechanism. So, for example, is it possible that we can incorporate the cost of avoided deforestation from cocoa plantations in a higher price of chocolate? And I presume the Lynch and the Mars and all the big chocolate producers and commodity traders in the world could create a premium product to start us off. And so the short answer for me is yes, we could. And one example is, just to build on the forest bond example, is what if we could issue a bond that was, say, an IFC bond purchased by corporates who have committed to net zero deforestation. And instead of taking cash for the interest, they take forestry carbon credits from avoided deforestation associated with cocoa plantations or palm oil plantations, right? And then we take that money, which IFC would still pay interest on its bond, and we commit that into these projects to help them avoid the deforestation. So that starts to become a conduit that starts to push more towards creating an asset class by pricing the externality and giving corporates now an ability to actually meet their own obligations of greening their supply chains, at least in terms of avoided deforestation.
No, I think these are great answers and great replies. The problem that I always have is, will the end consumer pay? Very often consumers, when they're interviewed, they all say the right thing. But when they walk into the supermarket, they will buy the cheapest product on the shelf. So it is a bit of a challenge to how to pass that across the supply chain.
That's true, Chris, and which is why I said you have to create it as a premium product to start with before it filters down into mass market.
Yeah. But can I respond to this? Because maybe one step further away from a financial institute, I think the markets are changing. If I see what's going on in the Consumer Goods Forum, we all discuss the fact that 2020 is almost there and what's going to happen, and etc. At the same time, the level of commitment of these larger players who strongly feel that they will never be the cheapest brand in the supermarket, but they will be the one that is preferred for its corporate story. I mean, Nespresso is not a coincidence. You can buy cheaper coffee, everyone knows this. But this will be part, and an increasing part, in a world that knows what's going on a global scale. They need to have better schemes in place than certification schemes in order to protect their brand. I give you one example from the work at the World Business Council, where we have the Soft Commodities Forum. Here we have 6 large players who made the Cerrado Pledge. So they want to be part of the solution in Brazil, not to do the wrong things there. We went into a very detailed dialogue how we could actually help them convince their farmers not to deforest, but to use the degraded land. Now, this is a group of people who is highly competitive. I mean, the most competitive market in the part of the economy is traders, because simply said, they add less value than many others. So there is something unique that they don't want to share. So what they really strongly feel is we need to do something. We need to do it collectively, because this is truly license to operate at stake. Partly because of the primary produce is not there to do the trading at the scale that the market is demanding, but also because of the people who look at their business see that this is business that is not sustainable in the long run. So they say, we need to work together, but we don't know really how. And then, that's why I'm so excited about this topic, and it's not at all boring. We were asked to actually get information from the individual farmer offer they do without sharing it between the people competing, and coming up with a standardized offer that is attractive for the farmer servicing or supplying to any of those traders, that actually makes it possible to do this degraded land investment instead of deforestation. So here you see a group of, talking about greening supply chains, a group of very influential large-scale traders on the global market, soft commodity markets, who strongly feel they need to do something. Business as usual is not gonna help them survive in the long run, and at the same time running into the boundaries of competition. We need to work together on this.
No, I think the word sustainability is a great way of bringing that pre-competitive discussion to the table. I think that's the key wording, because before, people were very standalone, and as you say, it's about brand protection and so on, but at the end of the day, everyone has got the whole philosophy now of working together on those issues. And the common commitments might be global commitments, but the competition is still on the ground, how you do your business. And it is about long-term survival. So, Chris, you said you were indicating you wanted to add something, or are you okay?
Yeah, I was just thinking. Just one comment on premium products. So we already have, as Bas said, certified products which are meant to be providing some sort of premium guarantees as to those products. So, yeah, there is a challenge. Certification doesn't provide all of the answers. So we've got to find a better way to incorporate that. That's clear. A consumer's willing to pay, as you say, Chris. I'm not entirely sure. Going back to the externalities and as a possible way for agribusiness to become more sustainable. The key words there, or the key part of the word, is just business. We need to find the business models that will allow us to operate in the future in an uncertain world. And that future, and we've mentioned 2020, but 2030 or 40, these things are around the corner in terms of medium-term business planning, especially when we think about assets and investment in assets. So we need to understand how those externalities will influence the decision-making we're making today for that uncertain future. So if we're not doing that, then everybody involved is basing those judgments on incomplete facts. We need to understand what the future could look like with respect to soil fertility. We need to understand about water. We need to better understand about weather. And we need to be able to incorporate that back into the business model and in the investment decisions we're making, and the engagement we then have with our investors, that broader investment community, the governments, the public sector around us. So not to do so, we're would be remiss, I believe. We definitely need to do that because the future is uncertain and we need to be able to portray the uncertainties of that decision making to the people that we need to invest in our business for the long term.
Yeah, I'd like to sort of ask the panel what they think of this real issue, the fact that as Bas pointed out, there's many commitments through the Consumer Good Forum, which is really great. But a lot of these are multinational companies, they're big companies. My biggest concern is, like, as we travel as a World Bank Group, we go around Africa, we go around Asia, Latin America, there's lots and lots of local companies. They're not doing the right thing yet. You know, we talk about a lot of international markets which are driven by commitments as well, but there's a lot of local markets where sustainability is considered to be a cost to those businesses. And they do actually, you know, they have a very, very different business model. I'm wondering where their incentive is for change. You know, unless, of course, they need finance, then finance can help, or they link to other supply chains. But I'm not sure, you know, if there's any comments there, because I respect, obviously, Jaime has made very strong points about his company, which is a local Colombian company, which is great and working well, but obviously IFC guidance, IFC support, IFC commitments as well. But I'm not sure if anybody here on the panel wants to take up that discussion about how do we have more influence locally.
One short comment looking at the palm oil. The percentage of certified palm oil and the behavior of many of the large players is moving dramatically fast. The Chinese 5 years ago weren't talking about it. If you see the speed at which they are adding criteria for their supply chains and looking for solutions at a large scale, you see the good side. You are right, India, no discussion yet. It'll come. I'm definitely sure it'll come. And I think the extent to which we are able to make that shift is depending strongly on the commodity. I mean, in the cash crops, there's much easier to do stuff than if people consume it themselves and they simply are autarkic, is that proper English? And they simply are not connected to markets and hardly to regulation. But the more it is being traded and the more we see supply chains ending up in established markets, there will be a push because we simply start seeing more and more on a global scale the negative downsides of it.
No, I agree. I'm not sure there's any more comments from this side. No?
Just to sort of build on what Bas was saying, I think, and what Chris said earlier, I think there has to be a certain level of comfort provided to whoever's originating this product, and that there will be a market ultimately for the higher cost product if they incorporate sustainability. I think we have to acknowledge that sustainability will add cost. So is there a role for, and I'm not looking at Jürgen to answer this, but still, is there a role for government in public policy to set up standards in a way, especially for traded export-oriented commodities, that ensures, and of course with that has to come the ecosystem for certification, for providing the finance, for the technical assistance. And while I understand blockchain very little, and I think it may solve all the other problems, but in terms of tracking sustainability attributes and in terms of land tenure as well, I think blockchain has a big role to play. So that whole move to regulation and modernization could, and again, it has to come from both public, but also from a package with financing and technical assistance associated with it.
No, I agree, but I just really would like to see more local market drivers to make the change. Particularly as we now look at, when we talk about a lot of products, I really appreciate the reference to palm, because palm is a big staple product. It's very much easier working with these niche small products to try and bring those to market more sustainably. And they are controlled very much by these bigger global players to a large extent. And they are overseas markets as opposed to local markets. There is a big movement now of really seeing local growth where there's an integration between processing of maize to local production of maize. We're seeing a lot more poultry feed being produced locally and then sold. But I see that IFC, and I'm not sure about Rabobank as well, whether when you invest more in this processing, are you putting more, not constraints, but more pressure on that supply chain to be more sustainable? Is that right or not?
Absolutely, because it definitely is in our risk domain. We definitely need to be sure that a lot of the risk parameters from unprocessed trades are taken out. And if we are able to have... The key to sustainability in all these soft commodities is the extent to which the supply chain can be strengthened vertically. Spot markets don't care about sustainability. If you are able to build long-term connections, predictability of supply and income, you are able to invest in the right solutions. So we need to go away from spot market, and we need to rebuild. This is a cooperative banking view, but we need to rebuild those chains. We need to connect people and players to do more than just anything for the last cent. Then it'll speed up quickly. So we are building those supply chains with the people we work with in order to strengthen that market.
Yeah, just a few examples really. Moving over the years, Olam started life as a trader. We're now vertically aggregated, and one of the reasons for that was there was value to be obtained, but there's also risks in being a trader. So we've moved forward to be vertically aggregated. So we're putting in farms, we're putting in processing plants, and around those assets, those long-term assets, we're able to build those longer-term, hopefully more sustainable and economically viable supply chains, and give confidence to the farmers in those areas that we're there for 20, 30 plus years with that asset, and with that investment can happen in those local markets, and products can be produced for the local markets. So grain operation in West Africa, milling wheat for flour for local market, to support local businesses to have a stable and safe product at hopefully stable prices, because obviously we're a global operation and can provide that stability. Or sugar in India, which happens to be an IFC project as well. So it's IFC, Olam, Solidaridad. It's public-private partnership with state government in India as well. But again, it's building around those assets to support enhancement of local infrastructure, enhancement of local markets, and give confidence of that long-termism, hopefully, that we'll be bringing into those areas of operation, so people feel confidence to invest and to expand in those agricultural operations.
Yeah, can I just ask the operators of Slido, can you turn the screen over, because we've been working through those questions as well. We can only see 4 out of, I believe, 8, well, there's 9 questions somewhere. But to be honest, let's as we've got a small audience, please do feel free if you'd like to come up to the mic and ask our panel a question. We've got a hand up already. Just come up to the microphone here and ask us a question as well while we go through this.
I'm Renat Heuberger of South Pole. My question to Jaime and potentially other panelists who have experience on the ground. The Colombian government has introduced a carbon tax last year of about $5, and you can offset it through investments to credits coming from land-based projects, among others. My question is, does that make any difference to your business? And if not, what level do you think would it take of such a carbon price to actually do shift the needle on your business, and where such a carbon price could actually really be transformative for sustainable agriculture and forest protection?
Yes, I agree with you. It's really important. It's really important to have it. The problem that we have is the scale, how we join together in order that the industry, all the industry, can do it together, because every company alone can do the effort to do it. In that way, and what happens is we do things and we don't have idea how to manage it, and how to that the people knows about that they agree with that, and they say we can do it, and get the support from the government, because the government has a lot of initiative and they bring a lot of things, but they never do anything.
Let me ask this question here to Nabil that's come up here. What can we learn from establishing new asset classes? What do we need to engage for success? Are you able to consider that in relation to the learnings of MIGA from the other sectors as we move into agriculture?
Actually, I was going to pick up, is MIGA able to ensure the natural capital?
I'll let you take that one as well then. Go
value
on.
better.
Sorry, they keep moving around.
They may be together, actually. Basically, there's a question, is MIGA able to ensure natural capital value or assets? Is there any opportunity to do so? Yes, we do cover the natural capital value. That means in the forestry, definitely a sapling is different price than would be a full tree, and we do take that into account. So we can cover the natural asset itself, and we do cover the physical assets of like, let's say, an agro-processing plant. So it is feasible, and we have done it in the past. Now, what can we do from different asset class? We can definitely cover that. I mean, we are very nimble institution. That means we are willing to consider different type of products when we are trying to insure them, and to work with the investors on the risks that they may be facing. One element that I mentioned, of course, I mean, we kept talking about de-risking, but I mentioned MIGA's. What we do is a non-commercial risks, and many of the risks that some of the investors face are the natural risks, are the weather risks and the water and of that sort. So we always, unfortunately, we are always linked to the non-commercial political risks in a way on that.
Okay, thank you. There was another question from the front here, if you'd like to put it to the panel, please. So just give us your name and your organization. Thank you.
Gerardo Segura from the World Bank. If approximately 60% of the world's lands are under customary tenure, and only less than 20% of this is legally recognized. So we've been hearing that tenure is a critical issue. And we also know that deforestation and ecosystem degradation is happening precisely in those areas. How do you see this, or how do you face this challenge in terms of moving financial services to these areas and being able to address a zero deforestation challenge and a restoration process? Thank you.
Oh, I'm not seeing anyone jumping to take the answer.
Well, maybe one short remark. I think it's not possible to solve this on a large scale without getting this done, and it's going to take time. The solution we've taken is a bottom-up approach in cooperatives, where you actually use the informal land titles that are there and make sure you have the full community involved, and as a result, put any conflict within the community to solve itself. But this is not, for a long-term perspective, a solution that we could work with in an environment in which we need to increase yields, professionalize, have less people involved. Only in the very informal rural communities you can actually have that as an intermediate solution. But given the fact that we talk also about the tougher areas of the world here, maybe that's a first step to buy time, so to speak.
So clearly no easy solution, right? And no short-term solution in many parts of the world. There are, however, a number of countries. Indonesia is a very good example, right? Indonesia has 3 different land maps in any given province. It has an old forestry map, it has a colonial map, and it has a local map. And you ask 3 different people who owns that land, you get 3 different answers, right? And so we've been racking our brain, and everybody else has. How do you invest in Indonesia in the already degraded land rather than cut down original rainforest, which is, of course, the worst thing to do, or go into the peat areas? And big companies, including Olam and others, have said we'd be very happy to invest in already degraded land, 70 million hectares out there, but we need to be clear about the land title. So one thing the World Bank's doing in Indonesia, together with other partners, is trying to sort this one out. And it should be possible, community by community, to actually agree legally where is the boundary and who owns the land. And it doesn't really matter that much at the end whether it's a customary outcome, a local outcome, or it's owned and managed by the forestry department, or whatever form you have. What matters is that there is clarity. That's the biggest challenge. Where it's not clear, there's very little you can do. I mean, it's just very difficult to do. So I think our challenge is to go to country by country, and that's what we're doing at the bank, as you know, and try to engage and see where we can move the needle in the whole conversation. And again, this is not about ideology. Not everything has to have a cadastre a la Europe, or that's not what this is all about. It's about getting clarity who is in charge, and that can very well be indigenous communities, and continue to be, and continue not to be mapped, but there's clarity. And then you put something on the table and you negotiate and you have a conversation. And then the key outcome of that has to be longer term security. If it's 10, 15, 20 years, you have a deal. And short of that, it's just not going to happen. I think that's how it works.
There are several models, though, wasn't there, between leasing, concession management,
Absolutely,
and so on.
absolutely.
It is confusing. And many companies...
We really need to make sure that we don't confuse this private land ownership with other forms of longer-term land use rights. I mentioned China briefly before. No one in China privately owns land. It's all on a lease arrangement. But it doesn't matter. If you know you have that land for sure with a signed contract for 20 years, you're going to plant your apple trees because you're going to get a crop in or two, and it's fine. No issue. I mean, even Australia doesn't have real private land. It's all crown land with 99-year lease. Of course, in practice, it's the same as privately owned, but it's actually not private land. So we need to be flexible there.
And in developing countries, it's essential to increase productivity. If you increase productivity, you will get less deforestation. Is the key.
Let me just, there's a question for someone, we've actually got a name here, Paul. Are there innovation funds to create private sustainable alternative solutions, such as new technologies, and also support the green startups? So this is about private sustainable alternative solutions. Are there innovation funds? I know here at the bank we've been working with quite a lot of labs, agripreneur concept, a lot of startup labs in countries like Nigeria and Ghana, which has also helped to really innovate change and, more importantly, engage youth and women as well in systems. So I'll just quickly take that answer to Paul. We're coming towards the end here. I just want to touch on this other question about data. What type of data can the public sector provide to support private investors? I'm a little bit concerned about that question, and I'll just sort of phrase it from the fact that there's a lot of data being collected by the private sector, let alone the public sector. And the public sector has been asking a lot from the private sector for data. So if we just have a last little word on data management, it's something that's come up in lots of events that the bank's been involved in. The privacy laws, and of course, is all there. But the private sector, particularly the traders, the companies that work at the coalface with farmers, a lot of this data is proprietary to them. And it's a real question of how does that data come up to inform government, and what is the role of the World Bank Group? I think that's a bit of an ask in data management. I'm not sure if anybody... You want to take that, Jürgen?
Well, we are experiencing a real disruption of the agriculture sector globally right now as we speak, including on the data side. Right? We've just installed, I see Eric sitting there. We just installed the Agriculture Observatory in this institution and on the bank side, which for the first time allows us in real time to have daily data on what the weather or the crop health looks like around the globe in every village on the planet. In real time on a daily basis, we can zoom in, Google Map, pick out a village, and we can tell you exactly what the weather has been the last 6 months, what the projections are, and what the soil moisture and crop interface looks like. And this is available. It's called Aware, is the software that we're using, and combining it with several other packages. This is data that was only available to a few in the past, if at all. It now will become increasingly globally available to all our clients. Traders used it for several years already, had a massive advantage over everybody else, and made a huge amount of money in the process. I can give you numerous examples how that worked really well. Our job as a public institution now is to get this into the hands of the farmers and into the hands of the clients and level the playing field. So weather data is one good example, but production data, many other things, sales data, pest and disease data, fall armyworm, there's now apps out there. The farmer just needs to put the cell phone on the leaf, can immediately identify it, gets recommendations. So all these things that used to be difficult to access for smallholders are now becoming actually democratized. They're becoming cheaper, available, and basically everywhere. So there is a lot going on. That's a separate conversation for a panel. What does the new technology do? To whom? Is it good or is it bad? 5 years ago, it was all for the big farmers. US farmers with 10,000 acres could have precision farming. You know what? Now very small farmers can do precision farming because they can afford it, and the technology is evolving in that direction. So this is really fascinating stuff. But overall, our conclusion at this point is that technology and innovation will be helpful to the smallholder farmers, because they will have access not only to market information, price information, but to many other things they never had access to before. And it's not a one-way street, it's a two-way street. So they will generate data, not only consume data, which will then change the whole game. But that's a fascinating topic, maybe for this afternoon. That's
for sure. I didn't want to go too far down that route because I know it's coming. Bas?
Yeah, data is fascinating. I give you one example in our own business. The whole term documentary credit will disappear in a few years' time. Our trade and commodity finance people say if we continue to do as we do today, our department will be bankrupt in 3 years' time. There is an immense innovation going on, and for the good, because, I mean, the financial sector is a cost to doing business. If we can do more efficiently with less people doing the same stuff in a better way, it's great for all of us, including financial institutions, but also public. If we are able to monitor much more easily, cheaper, whether things are actually going right or wrong in the Amazon, in the Cerrado, in Indonesia, we actually are able to, in a relatively efficient way, implement laws and policies better. And that is what we need as a private sector to build our investment decisions on. So data will be crucial, but in addition to that, we shouldn't wait until the data are there. We should start, including in the dialogue we just had here, we should start making mistakes. We should start by trying to be entrepreneurial, trying to work together in innovative ways, and allowing the people with whom we work to fail once in a while in order to learn. Because there's one question about a new asset class. How does a new asset class emerge? By making mistakes and by designing a market, failing, trying again, and building it so that investors have a track record from people who have learned how to do it in the best way possible.
I've got a couple of questions. Briefly, this was the conversation this morning, right? There were sentences said, there is not a business solution for everything in the landscape. That's true, but there's a business solution for a lot of it, and which is what you're saying. And we need to find those business solutions. We need to make the business case for the landscape investment. And we're kind of discussing it in broad terms, but what you're saying is we need to do it one by one, ecosystem by ecosystem, and try to understand what is the package that gets us the outcomes we want on the landscape level, and how do we get the money into this, and from whom and where and what, right? And I think we're getting closer and closer. This is why I find this really exciting, because we weren't there a few years ago, but we're getting closer now. And it doesn't have to be all of it. Even if a fraction of it, it will be billions, and it will make a huge difference in many parts of the world. That has to be our next objective.
I've got two people who want to ask questions. We're just about on the time, so you first, please.
Hi, I'm Lisa Palmer. I am an author of Hot, Hungry Planet and a journalist. One of my questions is up there. My question is for everybody here. So, how effective are your investment vehicles or your investments in delivering conservation outcomes? And, how do you know if your strategy is effective and who's measuring it?
Well, that's a very big question towards the end. Anyone want to take that, the high?
That's probably the most important question we're facing at the moment. As I mentioned, the change with OLAM 2.0 is to move from, and I think everybody will probably repeat the same, is to move from just doing things, from activities, to actually measuring outcomes and impact. And for me, and for what we're trying to do, it's about understanding what does it mean to the business, what does it mean, and by the business, I mean it's everybody involved in that value chain, not supply chain, value chain. So those farmers, the communities involved. So how do we measure the actual outcomes and impacts? So this is a piece of work that we're on with. This is one of the key pieces of work within the natural capital protocol, and a sort of a splinter group that came away saying, hey, we've really got to nail this, because if we can't really measure impact, then what are we doing about this? How can we go along to investors and say, hey, invest in us because we can deliver this better than the next person? So it's an area that we feel is this huge opportunity for competitive advantage. Speaking as private sector business, if we can do this right and be able to really genuinely measure the impact, the change, and how we might be maintaining the natural capital assets that we're working with, be it smallholder farmers, large scale, or our own land. This is fundamental to being able to move forward, and it's not there yet, if we're being honest. It's something that there's a lot of great work on. Natural capital is a bit more advanced than human and social, but we need to understand all three of those capitals and more around it, be it manufactured.
I'll have to cut you down a little bit. We've got one very last question there.
Yes, and real quickly here,
brief.
this is from yesterday's pre-conference
and you're
symposium. It's about...
Sorry, can you give your name? And
Yang Bodu, Sustainable Development Investment Finance Partnership for New York. So from yesterday's pre-conference symposium on investing, one of the upshots was that what would the public sector need to do in the near term, in the immediate term, so let's say 2020, that would be able to get those quick wins? Of course, focus on the long term and what could be done now and achievable, so that could be validation for 2020 through 2030 and beyond timeframe.
Anyone want to answer that last comment? Can you just clarify the question?
Yes, so in the immediate to near term,
right,
what could the public sector be doing?
Okay, in the immediate term.
Yeah, like by 2020.
By 2020.
If you want results by 2020, what you...
I mean, one thing the public sector globally can and should do is redirect the way it finances the sector right now through public money from what it does right now to a really different sustainability outcome. I give you one example, and it also answers your question a little bit. What is the impact? One very good example is Europe. Europe has traditionally given 60 billion euros of agricultural subsidies to its farmers, with very little regard in the past to whether or not this has positive or negative environmental consequences or whether there are better nutritional outcomes, etc. Over the last 20 years, it has changed. And as a result, today, the emissions footprint of agriculture in Europe is 20% lower than it was 20 years ago, because it redirected a significant part of those subsidies to encourage farmers to use less fertilizer rather than more fertilizer. 20 years ago, farmers in Europe, and that's the last sentence, used about 200 kilograms or 180 kilograms of nitrogen, for those of you who are agronomists, to produce 7 tons of wheat per hectare. Today they use 70 kilograms of nitrogen and they produce 10 tons of per hectare. That's possible because of innovations in technology and application. That is fundamental change, and that's the right thing the public sector can do. And of course, there's much more to do to encourage private investment into the space, but I wanted to give you that as an example.
Please continue the debates after the discussion now. We're going to have to wind down. Vikram, you've got one last word.
Okay, I don't know if we can achieve anything that spectacular in 18 months, since that's the time frame, so I'll just park that for a second. But more importantly, I think in terms of public sector, and just tying this back to the asset class question, I think the question on how do you know you're effective is going to become critical. I mean, the asset class is not, so let's not get totally seduced by, oh, we must create an asset class. I think we need to put the frameworks in place. What defines it? What does sustainability mean? How are you going to track it? How are you going to qualify it? I mean, the green bonds emerging, still not fully established asset class is an example. We have a lot of work to do, including on effectiveness measurement, which has to move from a competitive advantage to informing the impact of how is this money going to be used in a year later, or 2 years or 3 years later, how is it going to feed back to the investors? Because I assure you, any investor, while it wants to invest in an asset class, also demands more of anything green or sustainable than they do of brown. And that is reality today, and impact reporting is going to be part of that. So effectiveness measurement is going to be critical as well.
We have to wind off. I'd like to give my sincere thanks to the panel and, of course, to the audience. I think we've had a very interesting discussion. I think one of my biggest takeaways, and I think it's a real good step, is this whole point of bringing externalities onto the balance sheet. Be accountable for what you do. There was an expression that, nature gives away so much, but it doesn't give an invoice. If there was an invoice sent by nature, companies' business models would change a lot quicker. So I really want to see the public sector come together with the private sector and work out what those invoices will be. So thank you very much, and please give a hand to the panel. Thank you.
Quick announcement. If you want